Hey athletes, Tony Bevilacqua coming at you today because I want to talk about cardio and I want to talk about strength training, and I want to talk about both of these things, right? Because in a lot of sense, we tend to separate them, right? They're two totally different things. And there is some truth to that, but I want to talk about these a little bit more, dig into this whole idea a little bit more, and I want to bring it back to what is going to be the most important thing for you to do to keep yourself as healthy as possible. Because if you're here with me in this group, the most important thing is that we're chasing the most healthful version of yourself. And the most healthful version of yourself doesn't have extra body fat, is able to do all of the things that you have a body that's capable of doing all of the things that you want to do in your everyday life. No matter what that looks like, no matter what the tasks are, no matter what things you love doing, whether, it doesn't matter. Whatever, we want you to have the capacity to perform all sort of different, to be able to do all different things. And to be able to go to the doctor and not have to worry about bad markers, to have enough energy to be able to do all the things you want to do. Like, these are the most important things. And when we talk about health, that's what we're chasing. So what's more important? Should I be spending my time on cardio? Should I be spending my time on strength training? And you may know where I'm going to go with this, because the answer, when you hear it presented this way, should kind of be like, yeah, well, what's the most important thing? Well, the most important thing is both. There is not one most important thing, right? We need a combination of both. And I'm going to draw it out for you, because I find that when we draw things, when we draw little models and little drawings, it just simplifies things, right? So what I want to do is I'm going to bring the camera down here. I'm going to show you what I'm drawing. So we have this continuum. We're going to keep this super, super simple, right? And on one end of the continuum, we're going to have strength training. And on this side, we're going to do cardio, right? And cardio, let's explain these, because we have to define these a little bit. Cardio is anything that's going to tax your cardiorespiratory system. So it's going to tax we talk about cardio exercise because we're always using our cardiovascular system. But when we talk about cardiovascular exercise, we're talking about taxing that system, going above and beyond what we normally do in our everyday life, right? So if we want to create some sort of a positive adaptation, we have to tax that system a little bit. We can't overtax the system. We have to make sure that the dose is right? But when we tax that system, generally there's a positive adaptation, makes you more efficient, and that way you can do more work in less time, right? So we're talking about heart, we're talking about blood vessels, veins, arteries, capillaries, all those things, and we're talking about lungs. Like, those are the primary components of the cardiorespiratory system. So when we're talking about cardio, that's one side of this thing. When we're talking about strength, I mean your ability to apply force to external objects. Let's use that as an example. Strength becomes a little bit difficult to really, we can quantify it to some degree, but there's people that will say, like, well, a gymnast is very strong, right? And there's some people that will say, well, a weightlifter is very strong, but those are very different ends of a spectrum of strength, right? So yeah, gymnasts are strong, but they're strong based on body weight. Weightlifting athletes are very strong based on how much weight they can lift, right? Like external objects. And again, this is a whole nother conversation, which I don't want to go too deep into today, but the value is when what we're chasing down for a healthful individual is we want a combination of both. We want to be able to manipulate external objects, right? So that when we're faced with picking up our grandkids or our kids or cleaning the garage, whatever that means for you, shoveling mulch, like whatever it is, we want to be able to manipulate external objects, but we also want to have some body awareness. We want to be able to manipulate our body in space when we're not loaded down with some sort of weight, right? So we want both, right? So we're going to call strength the practical application of force. How about that? Let's keep it simple, okay? So we got strength on one end, and that's really sort of taxing the musculoskeletal system, right? And then we've got cardio on the other side. And if we go back to our little continuum here, we've got strength. And on this side of the continuum, think of like strength athletes. I'm going to put like weightlifters here. Okay. That's like one end of the spectrum. So if I spend all my time just doing strength, I'm a weightlifter, right? And I've worked for Team USA Weightlifting. Like, we've developed some of the best weightlifters in the country. And these athletes focus all of their efforts in weightlifting. But when we tax them with something that has to do with more cardiorespiratory, they fall apart. Like, ask them to run a mile. They're not going to want to, right? They're on one end of the spectrum. I would argue that that's, it's an extreme end of it. If it's all you focus on, you're going to get very good at it, but you're giving up something on the other end of the spectrum. Now, if we go to cardio, we'll call these the marathon runners, right? This is the end of the spectrum. Or triathletes, right? Like Ironman, right? Like, these are all the endurance athletes, right? That are really good at going long distances at a moderately elevated heart rate for long periods of time, right? So that's the other end of the spectrum. If you just want to be a super healthful, energized guy that looks good, that's able to do all the things they want to do in their life, play with the kids, go out and maybe do a 5K run occasionally, go and, do yard work, whatever. We need to be, arguably, for health reasons, we don't want to be on either end of the spectrum, because there's a cost. If I'm all the way on this end, I give up a lot of my strength. And I've done this long enough where I've worked with amazing endurance athletes, and as soon as we put any amount of weight on them, they collapse. They just can't do it. Even gymnasts, if we put weight on them, they will collapse. Not collapse, but they will struggle significantly because they're just not strong, right? If we put weight on a marathon runner, they're just not strong, right? So you're giving up that end to be all the way on one end of the spectrum, right? And just like I mentioned, when we take a strength athlete, when we take a weightlifter and we have them go out and run, they suffer. When we put them on a pull-up bar, they suffer. When we tell them to do a whole bunch of push-ups, they suffer, right? Like, there's a cost that they're giving up. So if we want to be well-rounded, which I would argue is where healthy people are, that most healthful people in the world can do all of these things. We've got a high capacity, a high work capacity across all of these domains, both of these domains. Okay, does that make sense? I'm going to say it again. A very healthful person has capacities across all of these spectrums. So where do we have to train to be super healthy? Somewhere in here, right? Somewhere in the middle, where there's some sort of a balance of these systems. Because if we get like really deep into the physiology, there's completely different things happening, different physiological adaptations that happen on both of these ends. We want to pull from both of those areas, right? Like, that's where the magic happens. What I tend to find for most guys over 40, and women, for most people after college, quite honestly, the predominant way of training for the majority of folks tends to be on this side. If we want to get in shape, we go to running, and it could just be recreational, running, swimming, triathlons, right? Like, these are the things that we lean on to get ourselves in good shape, right? It's like, okay, I want to get in good shape. So what am I going to do? I'm going to start running in the neighborhood, right? Biking, like, these are the things that we lean on. And again, nothing wrong with that. But if that's all we're spending our time on, we're giving up some other things. And then as we get over 40, as we get older, we even shy away from strength training even more, because we're afraid that that's what's going to hurt us. We're going to get hurt. We're too old. We shouldn't be lifting heavy stuff anymore. And there is my rub. My rub is we're really giving up that end of it. But then what's interesting is a lot of these people, a lot of these, folks who have been leaning on the cardio side of it for years and years and years and been doing that, they're having injuries, right? And I call them silly injuries, because they're not strong, right? They're going out and they got, the runners have knee issues, the bikers have back issues, the triathletes have all kinds of orthopedic issues. Like, there's all these things that are going on because they're spending so much time on that side of the continuum, right? There's no balance, right? And look, like if you're a professional runner, if you're a professional, or if you just really just truly love that, I would argue that you still need to bring yourself back to the middle a little bit. But, that's the only time where maybe you want to be on just one end. If I'm making a living as a professional athlete, I have to do that thing, right? And that's a whole other conversation. But anyway, so if you're here with me, if you're an athlete, we consider an athlete something a little bit different than what we would 30 years ago. We're talking about how can we make you just the best version of yourself, the most healthful version of yourself. And if that's the case, we need to have capacities across all of these areas. We need to be strong. We also need to have some work capacity, some cardiorespiratory conditioning. So we need to start bringing things to the middle. And again, because we've been biased to one side for so long, we associate fitness with that end of the spectrum. In fact, it was like 20, 30 years ago, the fittest person in the world was, his name was Mark Allen. He was a professional triathlete. And, that was like the epitome of fitness. Right. And I believe that was wrong because he was just on this one side of the spectrum. He didn't spend any time. He gave up a lot of the other side. We need both, right? So we want to be somewhere in the middle. And if you're like most people and you're all the way on that one side, you're cardio based, you're cardio intense, then we need to start adding strength training. And that's one of the reasons that I push strength training in this group so much, because I talk to so many people who are missing that component. They're missing that component. And when we bring that component back into the mix, we start to see some cool things happen. You get strong, like legitimately strong. And I've been doing this for so many years that I know what it means. I know what sort of benchmarks we need to hit in order to be considered strong. And what happens when you're strong? You no longer have to worry about lifting stuff up. You no longer have to worry about silly injuries if you go for a run, if you do a triathlon. Your threshold to damage, I call it, is much, much higher when you're strong, legitimately strong, right? We need to have that strength. And when we do some form of strength training, there is a really good chance we're going to increase the amount of muscle tissue that you carry on your system. When you increase the amount of muscle tissue that's on your system, that's really good stuff to have around as we get older, because as you know, when we get older, that's the stuff that tends to go away. And when that goes away, our physical capacities decline enough so that we might end up in a nursing home. The number one reason people get put into a nursing home is not because of chronic disease, although that's one of the reasons. The reason people get put in nursing homes is because they've lost their functional capacity. They can no longer get themselves up off the floor. They can't lift something up if they drop something, right? Like that's the problem. We need to improve our functional capacities. And the more we hedge ourselves with some strength training, the less likely you are to ever end up in a nursing home. So there you go. And then I know there's been some talk and some comments about cortisol. The cortisol thing is real if we're stressed, and it doesn't come from just cardio. It can, like high levels of cortisol is associated with some belly fat accumulation and holding on to belly fat, 100%. If we're doing too much cardio, we can have an elevated stress response because it is a stress. If the dose is wrong, right? And I would argue that some of this is under recovery. Like let's say I'm just not sleeping good at night and I'm running 20 miles, 50 miles a week. That's gonna create all kinds of problems, right? Eventually you're probably just gonna blow yourself up. You're probably gonna get hurt, especially if you're not doing any strength training. But then the reason for the elevated cortisol is not necessarily because of the training that you're doing. It could be because you're just not sleeping at night, right? But then it applies to strength training as well. If I'm dosing myself too much and I'm eating really poorly, then my cortisol levels may be up. And it's not necessarily because I'm doing the strength training, it's because I'm not eating very good, right? Like we have to look at this from a much bigger perspective. To just say, cortisol could totally be the issue, but it's not because of overdoing cardio. It could be. I mean, that could be a component of it, but it can also be because of strength training. Could be because you're not sleeping good at night. Could be because your work is stressing you out. It could be because you're going through a divorce. It could be because you're going through a custody battle with your kids. Like, there's a million reasons why cortisol could be high. And I'll tell you what, one of the reasons, or one of the ways to manage stress is through sleep. If you're not sleeping good at night, sleeping is like the protective mechanism your body uses to manage stress appropriately. If you're not sleeping good at night, I don't care what you're doing, your cortisol levels could be through the roof, and they could stay through the roof. Get your sleep right. Get your recovery right. Get your sleep is so important. If we're talking about stress, your sleep is your body's defense mechanism against cortisol, against stress. Okay? If your stress levels are through the roof, get some sleep. Okay? Get some sleep. I find and I've worked with elite level athletes on both ends of the spectrum, on the cardio end and on the strength end. I'm a strength conditioning coach, so I've worked on both of these ends of the spectrum. And I'll tell you what, the ones who are overtrained, a lot of times we fix their sleep and they can start training hard again, right? They can start training hard again. So this, we can't be too simplistic with this whole thing. We have to look at this from a much more broad point of view, a much more broad perspective. And when you can get this broader perspective and you can start bringing in some of these big things, like get your nutrition right, get your sleep right, make sure that you're not just overdoing the cardio, make sure that you're not just overdoing the strength, get yourself strong, make sure the dose is right, but also tax your cardiorespiratory system, improve your overall work capacity, and you can't go wrong. And you will win 100% of the time, right? You will win 100% of the time. And you will be the most healthful version of yourself, because then there is nothing in this world that you can't accomplish. There's nothing you can't do. I mean, within reason, of course, but it's amazing just how you can improve your physical capacities so much if you train in the middle. I should use that as a mantra. Train in the middle. Train in the middle. Don't bias one side or the other. You can have different phases of life where maybe you're a little bit more on the strength side, maybe you're a little bit more on this side, but we never give up one for the other. We value both. As an athlete, as a healthy person, we value both. There is no dominant side. If you're lacking in one side, then you want to focus on that side a little bit more. And I find most people, and this goes across all age groups and all genders, are very, very weak, like ridiculously weak. And this is from 20 years of experience in the trenches. Most people are very, very weak, and they don't know how to get strong. They don't even know what it means to be strong. So that's one of the reasons I tend to lean on strength a little bit more in this group. It's not to say that cardio isn't important, because it is, but we tend to be way heavy on one end. All right, there you go. Hope this finds you well. And sorry, you probably heard my son in the background and my wife making all that noise. So yeah, man, it's life at home, life during COVID, right? All right, hope you're well. If you have questions, you have comments on this, I would love to hear them. Tell me your thoughts. Tell me what you've been doing. Tell me what works really well for you. And again, I don't want to get into like what works the best for weight loss, because you can lose weight as a cardio person. You can lose weight as a strength person, as long as you're eating well. You can lose weight as a smoker. It doesn't necessarily correlate with health. I have a brother who smokes a pack or two a day, and he's been doing it since he's 16. He's extremely lean. You can see his abs, but it doesn't mean he's healthy. So we have to be really careful with what we're associating cardio and strength, like how we're measuring health. Health is not just about being lean. And quite honestly, you can carry a little bit of excess body fat and still be pretty healthy, right? There is a threshold there. But anyways, so hope you're well. Would love to hear your thoughts on this, and have an amazing day.